Can I get at least one thumbs up that you can hear me? Okay, a lot of them. Very excited to be here today. My name's David Johnson. I'm with Domo. Domo is an end-to-end data and analytics platform. It's not about me, though. It's about Brad. We're going to walk through kind of the journey of getting set up on a BI platform, basically just building a data culture from the ground up at Hush. So Brad, I'd like to turn it over to you, just hear a little bit about your background, the journey that took you to Hush, and then we'll get into the Hush opportunity itself.
Sure, thanks David. Yeah, I'm Brad, I'm the head of data at Hush Homeware. We are a women's fashion retailer. We sell predominantly online through our own website, but we also have concessions in John Lewis stores. And prior to that, I worked at another fashion retailer, Superdry. And at Superdry, we implemented a reporting platform across the organization, 500 end users, full data stack, and did that for 4 years. And then I got the opportunity to move on to Hush. Hush grew massively shortly pre-pandemic. They had private equity investment, and there was a big investment in technology in particular.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear, Brad and I have kind of talked through the journey of going to Hush and what that looked like. Has anyone in the room ever inherited legacy technology at a company? You go into a role, okay. I think I saw a few hands, but I know that there's more of you out there. So Brad, I'm curious, when you went to Hush, what was different about the opportunity going there versus what you were experiencing at your prior company?
So the really good thing about the Hush opportunity was there was none of that technical debt. It was completely greenfield. There was the realization that there was a need for better reporting processes and for better reporting systems and just a better data capability overall. But there was no legacy. There was nothing previously. Up to that point, everything in the business had run on Excel. An ad hoc extraction systems. There was no centralization, there was no tooling, there was nothing. So it was a completely greenfield, completely build something from scratch.
Amazing. And then I'm just curious, what I want to do today is we're not diving in specifically into any one vendor, technology, anything like that. It's more so just the thought process of building something from scratch. So you're coming into this company, there's no legacy technology, you're not inheriting a broken implementation of some database or something like that. You're starting from nothing. And I want to know the mindset that you go through. We're going to cover it in a couple different bits. The first one is going to be on the technical side of things, if there's features you're looking for, or capabilities, or even kind of what the evaluation process looks like. And then I also want to talk about what I feel may be more important is kind of the social or cultural side of it within an organization. And then the hope is today that everyone with our varying tech stacks and so forth can kind of take those away and maybe implement any of that. So let's start from a technical side of things.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things from a technical point of view was the ability to centralize and collaborate on data so that the business could work from kind of a single source of truth, which is a bit of a buzz phrase, but it was important for a business that had grown incredibly quickly, was incredibly successful, and had done really well to kind of be able to centralize and for everybody to be on the same page, because it was growing to the point where Excel couldn't handle the load. A lot of time was taken up on kind of manual exercises in pulling together reports, and a lot of people's kind of days were, particularly on Monday mornings, were kind of summarizing the trading performance for kind of that weekly meeting, and it was important for us to be able to have that central source of truth, to be able to collaborate on that data, and also to be able to share reports across the organization.
Right, yeah, and it feels like to me from a capability standpoint, it's always finding the best way to enable users to build their own views, to work with data on their own in a governed and secure way, right? Where it's, I think on one hand, you think about the legacy, maybe 20 years ago, you get crystal reports or whatever, you go to the central team, you say, I want this report, I want this change, something like that. There's a process that goes in, and then it's kind of all managed there, where you know that everything is perhaps perfectly accurate, but there's a lot of overhead and process there. On the other end is absolute chaos, which is Excel files flying around an Exchange server with no security around them whatsoever. So how do you find, what capabilities are kind of help you to strike that balance there?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because ultimately, I'm a big believer in that the role of a central data team is about empowering the user, facilitating that access to information, and essentially making everybody's job easier. But at the same time, as you say, you can't just throw open it to everything to everyone. There's sensitive information within an organization. You can't give everybody that access. But at the same time, you want to make sure that people have that core information to do their job. So I think it's really about finding a balance. Ultimately, you want to promote that self-service culture. You talk about kind of the central analytics team. You don't want to force people into a bottleneck of I want to go to a central team for my report, because that just creates huge delays. And again, you kind of get disengagement with the whole process. You want people to be in a position where, if there's something that they want to know, they have somewhere centrally, a central reporting tool where they can go and answer that question themselves.
Yeah.
And I see the role of the central data team within that as ensuring that that system is well governed, has the right access controls, that the data it's looking at is accurate, is up to date, and is kind of performant in answering those questions, but not in kind of a support desk that users can go to kind of raise those requests.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for the end users to be able to do that themselves.
Makes sense. And then I'm curious, I just want to dwell real quickly on the selection process. Who here has ever purchased software in their life? For the company? Okay, pretty much everyone. So I think everyone, I'm on the vendor side of it. I've been at Domo for 10 years now, and I work in solution architecture and sales engineering, so it's all about, I see this side of the process. I'm thinking from yours, when I meet with prospects and customers and so forth, there's always, sometimes it's an RFP, it's different criteria, let's go into a POC, let's build a productionized pilot. Like, what was your mindset going through that? Did you bring in other users to evaluate it? What kind of did that look like for you, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I thought it was really important on the adoption side that we involved the end users from the start. Ultimately, I don't think these kind of things work well if, somebody in tech goes away, makes a decision, decides what's best for everybody, and says, this is the future, everybody get on board with it. So it was really important for me that we engaged those users from the start, and that we took their opinions and their considerations and what was important to them into account. But at the same time, we had to do the technical due diligence to make sure that the tool was fit for purpose, it had all those capabilities, and it was going to be kind of suitable for what we wanted to achieve.
Got it. And this is a tool, like the way you're using it is the users are logging it and using it. Whereas I think if you're further up the stack of maybe it's data connectivity or some ETL tool or analytics engineering or something like that, you don't need to involve the business per se. But if it's something they're using every day, it feels like a critical part of that evaluation.
When we're trying to implement a tool that, as I kind of said at the start, we want everybody to go to as a central source of truth. We want people to be able to interact with it, to self-serve, to engage with it, to really get the most out of it. It's really important that you get that user buy-in early and that they're comfortable with it and kind of happy with the tool as well.
Perfect. So I want to shift gears a little bit to something that I know both you and I feel strongly about, which is, okay, so we have the infrastructure, we have the tech stack kind of laid out, and we're implementing whatever. The important question to me is, how do you develop the culture around becoming data-driven, to get people using it, to get adoption, and to kind of roll it out within the organization in a proper way and scale it, I would say?
Yeah, and I think for me, the people side of it and the cultural side of it is really where you succeed or fail. That the data should be, well modeled, should be up to date, should be accurate. It's kind of a given. You can harm adoption if you do that stuff wrong, but just getting it right on its own isn't going to do a whole lot. So it's really about selling the benefit to people and really showing them how it's going to help them and what they're going to be able to get from it. Because the interesting thing with Hush, we talk about it being a completely greenfield opportunity, there not being anything before, and large parts of the business really recognize that having this reporting tool, having Domo, was going to be great and was going to make their lives easier, but they were still quite slow to adopt it when push came to shove. It was still the inertia bias of, my current Excel setup is imperfect, but I know it, and it works for me. I can kind of do what I need to do and get what I need to get to, whereas this new world, I'm not sure, because it's a bit of a fear of the unknown kind of thing. So really taking time to understand the users, what their pains were, identifying how the new setup could help them, walking them through and showing them, the positive elements of this new setup is really, really important. It's not good enough to just say, here's a great new tool. It's got all the data in it. It's going to do everything you need, and expect that people are just going to engage with it and think it's brilliant. You really need to do the kind of the hearts and minds, the selling of it. And I think you really need to see, if you're working on that kind of project internally, you need to see yourself as a salesperson to an extent.
Internally.
It's not their job just to use it because you've brought it in. It's your job to give them a reason to use it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the inertia bias is so real, both from this context, I think in your personal life or whatever it may be, right? Where it's better, but inevitably there is some level of change that has to occur to get to that point. And so it's going to be, there is always short-term friction. And so you have to get over that and kind of keep that vision in mind for people as they're kind of going through that process, I would say.
Exactly, and the greenfield element of it kind of made it even more of a challenge in the inertia bias regard, because if we'd had, an old system that was being kind of removed and retired, people would have to transition.
Yeah.
Whereas when they're going from I have nothing, they don't have to start using what you're bringing in. And that makes it challenging as well.
I'm curious about kind of the structure of teams and what that looks like culturally as well. I feel like as a small organization, it could just be you, say you have, 5, 10 people or whatever.
Yep.
It's you serving requests that come in of, I need to look at revenue over time or break down of product categories or something like that. As you grow, your team's obviously growing as well. Do you delegate some ownership into experts within the business, or kind of what does that look like for you?
It's a really interesting point for the size of the organization that Hush is. We're about 180 people. You contrast that to when I was at Superdry and we were 5,000.
Yeah.
The scales are very different. And while, like I've said, my approach is very much promoting a self-service culture of, people being able to go and access the information they need, that doesn't work quite so well when you've already got a lot of people in a growing organization that are quite stretched as it is. So one thing that we have tried to do that worked really well at Superdry is to try and identify who the key users are going to be in each area. So generally there are people who are churning the Excels at the moment. They sit closer to the data, they sit closer to the reports, identifying who those people are and really trying to engage them. And we kind of call them our data community. So they're kind of our group of users, the people that we can get a lot of information on out of on the business and the current reporting, and we can also kind of use them as the early adopters, if you like. And if we can get those people on board, they can, kind of spread the love to their teams and to the wider business to kind of to slowly start to bring everybody in.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it's interesting too, within different departments, say you have an HR team, a legal team, whatever it may be, right? You have to determine kind of if you have a subject matter expert in that group, their level of technical prowess, what they're capable of doing. Maybe they're, building their own SQL databases and doing crazy stuff like that, and that's great, and you can enable them with tools in a governed, secure manner. But oftentimes I feel like maybe there's light data manipulation, they just know what they want to get to, so it's how do you give them the tooling to do that and so forth.
Yeah, exactly,
right?
And I think that's, that kind of goes back to our discussion around empowering the user. You don't want to just kind of control everything and kind of lock everything down and stop people from serving that kind of a request themselves, but at the same time it's kind of a consideration on the governance level of, is it appropriate to give people the ability to transform data to that level, or is it something we'd rather keep centrally? But I'm always, if I can't find a good reason to say no, I always prefer to say yes, and to really ultimately empower those users to get the most out of the stack, because that's where you're going to drive the most results, and that's where ultimately people are going to find it the most beneficial to their kind of jobs.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've all in this room heard the term shadow IT. And I feel like when I used to hear the term shadow IT, I had this vision in my mind of like someone spun up a Postgres server under their desk on some old box and is doing all sorts of stuff with that. But really it's the proliferation of Excel files being emailed around unencrypted and just data flying all over the place and version control, that type of thing, right? So to me, it's like to the extent that you get it visible, certified, people know what they're looking at, and make it easy enough, you get less and less of that, and it's all within your purview.
And I think ultimately, the point about separate Excel files, that's a whole other issue with the definition of KPIs.
Yeah.
And if we're talking to sales, and I've heard it in pretty much every company I've worked in, if people are talking to, this is what we sold last week, invariably people will have 3 or 4 different numbers.
Yeah.
And all of them are correct, according to their own definition of what sales last week was. And that's the other benefit. We bring everything into one system. When we talk to a sales number for last week, we're all agreed on this is what the number is and this is how we define it. So I think that definition piece is really important as well.
Yeah. So I'm curious for Hush, Brad, for what you're doing there. What do you see as the company grows? What are kind of next steps, both culturally? Are there areas you're looking at from a technology standpoint, or kind of what does that look like for you?
I kind of see it as like it's an ever evolving thing. I never feel like to really embed a data culture and to become more data driven, I think, very few companies would ever actually get to that finishing line. It's a constantly moving thing. There's shifting priorities, new systems, just organizational changes that are kind of all reflected in that. So for me, it's just about trying to do it better each day, trying to make sure that we're kind of always keeping that goal of facilitating data to the end user, making sure that they're empowered to access the information and the data that they need to do their jobs, and that we're able to kind of to continue on that. I think the other thing is talking about things like machine learning and data science. As we begin to centralize more of our data, that also becomes kind of an option, something that we can use as well. But given what I saw at Superdry, I'm really kind of keen on getting the basics right first. And for me, the automation of the reporting, the access to information, getting that to a good level is a real kind of fundamental thing to get right first, and that's the focus.
For sure. Well, I appreciate it. I think that, anything else from a data culture standpoint, from technology, anything like that?
I don't think so.
Okay. I think given that we have a couple minutes left, we can take some questions here. We'll also be at the stand. How much time do we have? Yeah, so curious if there's any questions. I don't think we have mics, but yeah. I'll repeat the question, so.
How is it tool being used? You also see that it's just implemented and nobody uses it and it sticks to the old reports, or is there a change of culture as well? Do you accept it, working with the new analysis tool, explain what happens? Before somebody a bit afraid of what the new technology is, maybe not everyone is IT capable, for instance, programming. So how is it being used? I accept it.
Was the question, how's the new tool being used and how's that adoption process going? Okay.
Is it being used now in the way which you expected?
Yeah, would you say things are going according to plan as far as adoption goes and how the tool's being used?
Yeah, I think adoption is where we'd expect to be, but it's a thing that I see you're constantly chipping away at. It's the small wins. And I think one thing that we didn't touch upon that I think is really important is adoption is you kind of have to be showing people what's possible.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be demonstrating. And you also have to kind of be where there are opportunities to kind of demonstrate to people, this is how we can work now, we have that tool, you need to take those. So one we've had at Hush recently is, in the future, we're potentially looking at opening our own physical retail stores, which we don't have at the moment. And the discussion on that started very much about, well, I think, saying somebody who's been in the business 10 years, well, I think this would be a good location, or maybe we should think about that, or we should have, a store here. Whereas I immediately challenge that with, well, why don't we look at where our customers actually are? Why don't we look at the geographic distribution? Because we can do that really easily. Here's a map I threw together in 5 minutes. And really starting to bring people around to, you have access to this data now. It's not difficult. You don't have to send someone away for 2 days to get that answer. You can get it easy, start to use it. And I think it's those little things that just slowly start to shift the culture. So maybe in future when people make those kind of decisions or start to wonder if we should make those kind of moves, they can actually go and look and say, what data do I have that will help me inform that decision?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like that bit right there, you touched on something nice, which is to the extent that you illuminate augmenting what they're looking at, the analysis they're doing with other data sources, then I think the wheels start to turn a little bit, where on a very simple level, it's, let's look at our retail thing. Well, let's bring in weather data and see how that affected footfall, right? It's just a very basic correlation or causation, I suppose. And then even from, I've been around data for a period of time, we'll have people come to the business and be like, why don't we look at this group subset of people and analyze, do some NLP on their LinkedIn posts and understand what they're looking for, that type of thing. Why, in my mind, I didn't even think we want to go down that path or that's possible or what that looks like. So there's always kind of that next level to me of illumination as far as what can be done with data that gets people excited to go down that path, I would say. So, perfect. Yes. I'll attempt, I got it. Sorry, I'll repeat the question. I apologize.
Can you ask Brad something?
Oh, do we have a mic? Kim?
1, 2.
Okay. There you go. I'll stand over here so I can listen, though.
Hi, Brad. I'd like to know more about the process you went through to select the platform you did and why you chose Domo.
So he wants the process you went through to select the platform you did and why you chose Domo.
Yeah, sure. So interestingly, coming out working at Superdry, I worked with another reporting tool. Shall I say the name? Or I used to work with Looker. I was a Looker customer at Superdry for many years, and so I kind of came out, and with this greenfield opportunity, I was quite keen to just see what was in the marketplace, because it would have been very easy for me to go, I've worked with Looker before, I'll use Looker again, because I knew it. We basically, because we'd implemented a similar setup at Superdry, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, and it was kind of what we discussed. The self-service capability had to be strong, the ability to connect into cloud data warehouses, the ability to have, permissions, access controls, row-level security, all those kinds of things. And there were a few different tools that kind of met that criteria. We went through a few trials. Again, we showed the users, which was really important because it was going to have to be the tool that that they engaged with and that they used. And then we just kind of graded them based on the criteria that we knew was important to us. And of all of those tools, Domo came out on top. And in the year that we've been using it, it's a great tool. The users love it. I love it. My team loves it, and it's working really well.
Yeah. And I feel like, too, just one point on that, there's no bias. I'm on the vendor side. But just from a software evaluation standpoint of things to keep in mind is, so for me, one of my roles is kind of structuring proof of concepts and the evaluation phase or something like that, right? And what I always feel is important and where I see the most success is when people come not with sometimes we'll get an Excel file with 600 different checklists of just pure capabilities, and then it's scored, and then a selection's made or something like that, right? And there's certain merit to that, maybe from a security evaluation standpoint or something like that. But when you think about using it, it's always, let's identify a useful use case that we can work towards. Let's make sure that we take a cross-section of as much of the technology as possible. So we want to aim towards a goal, get the people that will be using it throughout the process, but then also make sure that on that journey, we're touching on different capabilities that are important. Connecting to data, transforming data, the query speeds, right? Benchmarking, all these things are important, but I think ultimately is getting the buy-in from the users and understanding what makes the most sense for them at the end of the day.
And just to tag on to that, I think another really good point is that when you go through those selection processes, the company behind the software is also really important because those are the guys you've got to work with. And unfortunately, post the acquisition, I think that's where Looker started to go a little bit awry. If you have problems with the software as you do, understanding what's coming up, you have to engage with the people that support the software and kind of represent the software. And that was another area where Domo scored really highly, and they're really good people to work with.
Yeah, Brad and I were having this conversation before this today, which is, I feel like if you look at the technology from a tech standpoint, there are certain features that will jump out to you and capabilities that you need or something like that. And there is a certain level of absolutely differentiation across vendors at any point in the stack. But also the people you work with are very critical to your success. And I think you can find people in this room that have the exact same stack where it's, okay, I have Fivetran to DBT to Snowflake to Power, like the same exact thing, but the implementation and success within the company are vastly different because there's so many other X factors within that as far as the cultural dials that they're turning, the people that they're working with at those organizations. I think it's important to keep those in mind, that it's not just making the right picks, it's everything else when the actual work begins, in my mind, if that's fair to say. So I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Okay, we'll take, yeah, sure. Cheers. A lot of front row questions, which is easy for me.
Hello. So what's the size of your team? What roles have you got in it, and why have you got those roles?
Size of the team?
Sorry, we don't have the headphones, so.
What's the size of your team?
Yep.
What roles have you got in it, and why have you got those roles?
Yep, sure. So it's a small team. When I joined, it was just me. And I've always enjoyed kind of being quite hands-on, so that was good. As we've kind of scaled up, we now have myself and 2 data engineers. Primarily just to support that whole centralizing the data and getting it ready for the users. So given we're going for a self-service approach, I don't really want kind of central reporting analysts. The goal is to kind of embed those in the business. But I think in future, in terms of how that central team may grow as we scale, we'd potentially look at data scientists as well to kind of bring into that mix. But I think given the size of the organization, like for example, at Superdry, when we were servicing kind of 500 users, I had 5 data engineers. So given that Hush is, less than 10% of that size, kind of a team of 3 kind of works quite well, and is enough for us to scale and kind of service what the business needs.
Perfect.
Yes, and it's kind of like at the moment, like I say, that whole
and his question was the analyst sit out.
Yeah.
Just for everyone else. So
at the moment, proving that it works, we're kind of doing the little bits of that, and I'm more than happy to throw together dashboards or charts or reports or whatever. But the idea is, that the analysts will reside in the business units. The other advantage of that, I think, is, and I always say this to people inside the business, although I've worked in fashion retail for 6 years, I don't know fashion retail like a merchandiser would, or like a designer would, or like a garment technologist would. So I could build you a dashboard on any of those things or related areas, and it would probably be all right. But you're going to get more value out of that by giving a tool like Domo to somebody who works in those areas, and then they can combine the domain knowledge that they have with the access to the data. And that's really where it becomes powerful, I think.
Perfect.
I'm just a data person.
I think we're at time. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll be the booth's right over there. We're going to kidnap Brad for a little bit. So if you have questions for him, come find us. But really appreciate the time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.